So recently I've been using this camera, the EOS R, a lot, and it's a great camera, but it does have some limitations also, not having full frame 4K, no 120 frames per second, and recently I've been noticing that in certain situations there's a lot of noise, like probably maybe in this section, there's a lot of noise that you see. I guess I'm also kind of picky with the image of my cameras. I also love my Sony. This is the Sony a7 III, great camera, jam-packed with specs, 120 frames per second, full frame 4K, basically everything you need. But you know what really sucks for me about having a Sony camera? Almost all of my lenses are Canon mount lenses. And I don't really feel like spending thousands and thousands of dollars buying the exact same lenses just for a Sony mount. This is the only Sony lens I have, the 16 to 35. I don't want to spend all that money and I don't want all those extra lenses. So how do we save thousands and thousands of dollars on lenses? These guys. And no, this isn't sponsored. I paid for these myself with my own money. Now, I've already shown you guys before how to save money with filters. For example, ND filters. Everybody needs ND filters. Instead of buying a whole bunch of these for every single lens, you just use these. Here, I'll show you quickly. So using these step-up rings, you can put this bigger ND filter onto smaller lenses, therefore saving you money. Same principle here. We're gonna use lens adapters to save you a whole bunch of money on lenses. Let's say you buy a whole bunch of Canon lenses like I have, and then you get a Sony camera. What do you have to do? Do you have to sell all of your Canon lenses and buy all new Sony lenses? No. Instead of selling them all off, all you gotta do is buy one of these. I just put my Canon 70-200 onto this Sony a7 III, and I did not have to spend any more money except, well, buying the adapter. I did have to buy that, but I didn't have to buy another. This lens is like $2,000, I think. I didn't have to spend thousands of dollars rebuying all of my lenses for the Sony camera. It's the minimalist way. Now these adapters are made by Metabones and they allow you to attach your Canon lenses onto a Sony camera like this. But there's all sorts of different versions of them. They have some for Panasonics, other Micro Four Thirds cameras, and I'm sure there's a whole bunch of other ones too. Now the great thing about these adapters is that everything works electronically also. Now be wary, this is probably one of the big downsides of using something like these adapters, is that autofocus might not be quite as fast or as reliable. So if you, for example, are a photo shooter, this isn't always gonna be the best. And then if you rely a lot on video autofocus, there may be some differences. I tested it out and it seems like it's working pretty good. Here is a test of the Sony a7 III using the Metabones and a Canon 16 to 35. So yeah, how's it doing on the focus? This will be good even for myself to see how well it can handle autofocusing. There were times where it was kind of bugging out, but for the most part, it did the job and the autofocus worked. But this is one of the downsides of using something like this, an adapter. But they do claim that image stabilization, all those things should work just as they were meant to. But if you rely on a lot of autofocus, I would definitely at least test it out for yourself first. If you don't need autofocus, these are a no-brainer for you. Now, it's important to note that these do not work well with all lenses. Canon lenses are actually some of the best to use adapters with, and I'll show you why. Here's my 1DX, and if you look inside, there's quite a big distance between the sensor and where the mount is. And this allows for some interesting things and also limits how you can use these adapters. With Canon lenses, you can pretty much put them on any camera because there's such a big difference. For example, with the Sony, there's a much smaller difference from the sensor to the lens mount. So you can use things like these adapters because you have all that space to play with. But, for example, you would not be able to put a Sony lens, this Sony lens, onto this Canon because it needs a bigger distance between the sensor and the lens mount, and there's no room for adapter because this is already supposed to be closer to the sensor. Does that make sense? Hope that makes sense. But that space also allows for some really interesting things. For example, this one is actually a speed booster, so it has a piece of glass, kind of like a magnifying glass in between here, in between the sensor and your lens. And what it does is it'll actually make your lenses wider, so it'll make your, for example, crop sensor feel more like a full frame sensor, and it'll also make your lenses faster. So you'll be able to get more light through your lens, essentially making the f-stop even faster than it is. For example, on the Sony a6400, which I will get tomorrow, I believe. One of my favorite things to use a speed booster was on the GH5, making it feel more like just a normal crop sensor, a 1.6 crop. And then with the Sigma 18-35, it would make that 1.8 lens, which is already crazy fast for a zoom lens, it would make it into a 1.2. So you would have an 18-35 f1.2 with this speed booster. That's absolutely crazy. The fact that you can upgrade your lenses using this, that's a really interesting thing in my opinion, especially being able to get closer to a full frame look. I really like full frame, and crop sensors just don't have that same look, but with something like a speed booster, you can get yourself a little bit closer to that look. My friend Potato Jet actually just did a video on this, making the Canon M50 look more like this camera, the EOS R, using a speed booster. Now, it wasn't Metabones, and on that note, I've only tested out Metabones adapters, and I've found them to be really high quality, really useful, but I can't vouch for the other companies. There's a lot of other companies making similar adapters, so you do want to be wary trusting some of the knockoff brands, but they might be just as good and way cheaper. I'm not sure. You need to test that out for yourself. But definitely be careful, because not all of them will be the same, especially with all the electronics working or not working. You can also do some pretty interesting things using older vintage lenses. So this little adapter allows you to put this super old lens onto this new Canon 1D X2. This lens, the Helios 442 f2, it cost I think like $30, and then this adapter was like $15. And so you get these really interesting, cool looks using these vintage lenses, and you can put them basically to any camera, again, using these adapters, which a lot of times can be even cheaper than buying something like the Metabones, which can be a lot more expensive. But also, this is more versatile in my opinion. This is just gonna basically do a very specific type of vintage lens to your Canon or your Sony or whatever camera. But still really interesting. There's a lot of options with lens adapters. So in conclusion, lens adapters can allow you to put new old lenses onto your cameras. They can increase the quality of your lenses, like this speed booster. And most importantly, they're gonna save you thousands of dollars being able to put your Canon lenses onto your Sony camera and not having to buy all new lenses every time you switch cameras. Because that's one of the big concerns switching cameras, is thinking, oh man, do I have to buy all new lenses? Do I have to sell all of my old lenses, which is gonna be a really big pain, and spend more money to buy new lenses? And for example, with the Sony lenses, they can be really expensive. They're not cheap. So having to buy new 16-35s, new 7200s, it gets really pricey really fast. And now these lenses do cost a little bit, but it's gonna save you so much money not having to replace my 85mm, my 50mm, my 35mm, my 17-55, my 18-35, my 7200, the 16-35 that I'm using right now. I don't have to replace all of those lenses. I can just buy one adapter, and then I can use all of my Canon lenses on my Sony. I'd say that's pretty dang good. And that's why I've invested into Canon lenses so much. Not only is there so many different options, there's so many Canon lenses, and they're fairly affordable, especially if you buy them used, but they can also be adapted to pretty much any camera, which over the long run is gonna save you so much money not having to buy new lenses every single time you switch cameras. So buying and using these adapters is kind of a long-term play. You're gonna save yourself a ton of money over the long term, not necessarily in the short term unless you're literally switching camera bodies right now. But again, do be a little bit wary with autofocus. That's the one issue I would say. Test it out first. If you don't need autofocus, just go save yourself a whole bunch of money on lenses. Worth it.